which is an open science session. And we have 4 presentations in this session. First one will be given by, again, the rules are the same as I just mentioned. The first presentation will be about the uptake of open science, mapping the results of a systematic literature review. You can see here the list of authors of the paper, and the paper will be presented by Hanna Shmagun, who is a doctoral student. So Hanna, you can try to unmute yourself and turn on video while I'm talking about you. Hanna is a doctoral student at the University of Science and Technology, research at the Korea Institute of Science and Technology in South Korea. Her research interests include digital transformation of public administration, science and society, and her current doctoral research focuses on open science data sharing and reuse policies and practices, especially in public health emergencies. She was awarded research and academic mobility grants to conduct e-government related research in Estonia and South Korea. So now, Hanna, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. After that, you will be able to share your screen. Please listen to Hanna's presentation and raise your question in Q&A. Hanna, try to leave a couple of minutes for the questions after your presentations. Sorry for my long introduction. I already take some time from your presentation, but hopefully we will be on time later. Yeah.
Hello, everybody. I hope you can see my presentation. Hello, everybody. Thank you very much, Dragan, for such nice introduction. And it's real pleasure, it's real honor for me to be presenting first paper in such important international conference. And I hope all of you are coping well with technology involved. And let me start. In this short talk, I will be discussing these issues. Please look at my slides. First, I want to briefly show the evolution of science. Sorry, something happened, it seems.
Hanna, we can see your presentation. And
yes, okay, sorry. Now I want briefly to show you the evolution of science, how we reached the second open science revolution. So the second open science revolution started at the end of 20s, triggered by the development of information and communication technologies, knowledge economy, and democratic movements such as open government, open source, open access. And this revolution really brings fundamental changes in science. Okay. Open science is an umbrella notion encompassing various movements aiming to remove the barriers to knowledge creation and dissemination by maximizing openness at each stage of research life cycle, thanks to the networking benefits of information and communication technologies. And on this slide, you can see 2 researchers who greatly contributed to the development of open science concept. There are 5 schools understandings of open science, which are democratic, pragmatic, infrastructure, measurement, and public school. And each of the schools has its own research focus to open science. Okay. In our study, we used mixed method systematic literature review and followed PRISM protocol to retrieve academic papers according to our research questions. So our research questions you can see here. First one is, what are the most important sub-concepts of open science. And for this, we used a network analysis of papers' keyword co-occurrence by building adjacency matrix. And the network was visualized using VOS viewer software. Next one, what are the main fields of knowledge under which open science is studied? And we identify a field of knowledge for each reviewed paper according to its metadata in international scientific databases and performed frequency calculation. Next one, what are the key characteristics and categories of open science data? And for this, we used qualitative analysis of literature, retrieved literature. And the last one is what is the relationship between open science data and open government data. And for this, we used, again, a qualitative analysis of literature. So let us proceed to the results. Here is a visualized network of the keywords that were used 2 or more times or in our retrieved open science related papers. The closer the nodes in a network, the stronger the relationship between them. More important nodes with higher total link strengths have a bigger size, and 5 colors of nodes represents 5 clusters of the most compatible concepts. I will explain you later each cluster. Here's the next graph. This graph shows you in a descending order the range of importance of open science related concepts based on their total link strengths. Okay, next one. And here you can see the results of a cluster analysis. On your left-hand side, yellow cluster is the most influential cluster, and purple cluster is the least influential one. So the main idea of cluster number 1 is general issues of open science concept aiming to stimulate transparency of the whole research process in order to achieve research reproducibility and to prevent biased findings, so-called questionable research practices such as hacking, p-hacking, cherry picking, and selective omission. Cluster number 2 is centered around open access, mostly associated with published articles. It is well elaborated aspect of open science. One of the early movements of open science started in the 1990s among academics to protest against the rising subscription costs of academic journals. And open access has been especially developed in the context of publicly funded research as an obligation to provide access to research results to taxpayers. Next one, cluster number 3, is about open research data, which is open data generated in the middle of scientific research, used as a primary source for research and necessary to validate research findings. Opening research data is a more complicated issue if you compare with published articles. Intellectual property protection mechanism should be much more adapted to research data, and possible personal data of human research subjects involved should be well protected. In order to motivate researchers to publish their research data, which is a rather complicated process, as I said, development of incentive structures is a very important issue. Central concept of cluster number 4 is citizen science, which is related to the involvement of general public in a research process. And here you can see the 2 well-known projects, Galaxy Zoo and eBird, with citizen engagement in science. And last cluster is about science policy concerned with implementation and management research infrastructures as commons. Research infrastructure includes interconnected components such as scientific equipment, knowledge resources, and computing systems and services. And according to concept of commons, these resources should be jointly used by a particular community, and private appropriation and commercial distribution of such resources is not acceptable. Usually research infrastructure is developed within particular discipline, and you can see here example of European Union research infrastructure for earth science. Next section. In our results reveals the potential of open science to be a domain for interdisciplinary research. In this pie chart, you can see that the Majority of reviewed papers comes from library and information science and also computer science. Next section is about open science data. By open science data, we understand diverse scientific information resources generated at all the different stages of open research lifecycle. Compared to open data, which should be open by default without any legal or technical restrictions, the main principle of open science data is open as possible and closed as necessary. And on this slide, you can see main particular characteristics of open science data. In the majority of cases, there is restricted and controlled access to open science data complying with personal data protection and intellectual property laws. At least registration and authorization procedure is required. Sometimes a user should be affiliated with a particular research organization in order to be granted the permission to use such data. Also, it is a high risk of misunderstanding, wrong interpretation of such data by non-specialists. We identified 5 categories of open science data. I will give you example on the later slides. The most developed open science practices so far mostly related to open research results. Other categories of open science data has less clear policies yet. So first, research results are scientific end products, for example, in the form of peer-reviewed published papers, patents, research reports submitted to a funding agency, which produces a result of completing research projects. And here you can see four good examples of centralized repositories of research results from publicly funded multidisciplinary research projects. Next category is so-called study pre-registration reports, which is a registration of and peer review of study design and methods before commencing the research. Study pre-registration tends to change the classical publishing model. It introduces additional peer review here, which takes place before data collection starts. However, so far, study pre-registration has been rarely practiced outside psychology and clinical studies. For example, in the United States, pre-registration is required of clinical studies is required by law. Next category is open research data, which I already mentioned. And here you can see examples of open research data platforms. For example, in Korea, there is a general platform of research data from government-funded multidisciplinary research projects here. And also recently launched COVID research data portal, where you can find genome sequences, protein structures, and so on. Another category of open science data is source codes and correspondent inline comments, which can be used in reproducible computational research. It can be found, for example, in a GitHub platform. Finally, online comments and posts on science blogs, academic social networks, and citizen science platforms can also be considered as valuable open science data. We can extract some new knowledge by applying data analysis tools to such content. And final section is about open science data, open government data. At first glance, general concept of open government and open science share similar goals, such as transparency, multi-stakeholder collaboration, and citizen participation. For example, in the United States, some citizen science projects and open science data sharing initiatives have been developed in line with Obama administration Open Government Directive. Also, some researchers argue that open science data and open government data are similar in a way that they are both created using taxpayers' money, so it's kind of public sector information. However, despite some similarities, open science data and open government data has different producers, different owners, which for open science data, researchers, for open government data, government officials. Also, they have different data management plans mandated by separate laws and different responsible government agencies. a small part of open science data can serve as a primary source for open government data and can appear in open government data repositories in a processed form, so-called open government data related to science. The examples are some statistics such as country expenses on R&D, research trends, some announcement of scientific events, and so on. And finally, I want to introduce you the areas of my future research, which is the goal is to develop a conceptual model of ideal national open science data ecosystem with a specific focus on public health emergencies. As part of it, it is relevant to investigate opportunities for data fusion, linking open science data, open government data, in order to design better public services and find solutions to such complex problems as public health outbreaks. Thank you very much, everybody, for listening to me. And I will be happy to get your questions.
Thank you, Hanna, very much. So can you try to find the Q&A box here in the tool?
Just a second.
So probably you're now in the Zoom mode, in your in the full mode in your Zoom client. But if you're going over that green area, you will see the option of the Zoom.
I see.
And Q&A. There are three open questions. We have also one raised hand, just to see. Miriam.
The first question is about importance of concepts in cluster analysis, right? As you can see. Importance, it means in our network, it was nodes with the highest total link strength. So it means this keyword was the most often found in our retrieved papers, what to say.
Mm-hmm. Okay, maybe can you then select one more question to answer live? Mm-hmm. After that, you can stay in the call and type answers on all questions if you want, of course. And then we will introduce the next speaker. So please just select one more question which you would like to answer.
Just a second. For example, so it's lots of questions just appear. What keywords we used for searching in Prisma model? We used 3 international scientific databases, which is Web of Science, Corpus, and the final one. Just let me see. And EPSCoR, and it's not just open science data. It's actually, it was lots of trials, like science and technology data, open science data, open data, lots of combinations. So it's not just open science. If you are interested, I can provide you later. If you send me email, I will provide you the full list of keywords if you want. What else?
Okay, Hanna, thank you very much for your presentation. Unfortunately, I don't think we will have more time for more questions, unfortunately. But if you
I will try to write answers to these questions.
Thank you very much for a very useful presentation, and thank you for joining us and to contribute to the program of this conference. I hope that I will see you next year at the conference. Thank you. Okay. Now I'm going to introduce the next presentation. Which is entitled The Interviewing of Reputation and Sharing, and there is also a subtitle of that. It's the significance of standardization in preparing research data and the impact of project organization. There is only one author of this paper. It's Saskia-Rabea Saskia-Rabea Schrade, and she works as a doctoral student and research at the Leibniz Center for Science and Society in Hanover, Germany. Her research interests are STS, qualitative social research, organizational theory studies, and the analysis of social structures. Her doctoral research focuses on scientists' practice on data sharing in Germany. The topic of her dissertation, she investigates the connection between scientific reputation and data sharing. So, Saskia, please unmute yourself. I will stop sharing my screen, then you can start sharing your screen. You're still muted. I'm going now to stop my video and to mute myself. You have 15 minutes for your presentation.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for the introduction. In my dissertation, I'm looking into scientists' practice of sharing research data. And today I would like to discuss some early findings of it, mostly regarding the topics data, standardization in its context, and project organization. I will start with a brief introduction and overview of the topic, followed by the theoretical approach. Afterwards, I will describe my sample and the methods I used in short, and I will end with the results, a short conclusion, and if there's still time left, a discussion of questions that aren't answered by this study. On the one hand, the concept of sharing isn't unknown within the scientific community, as it has also been introduced by Merton in the Norm of Communism of the Scientific Ethos in 1973, stating that scientific goods should also be of common ownership within the scientific community. On the other hand, also introduced by Merton in 1985 in the Norm of Originality, science is mostly driven or ruled by novelty, novel results, and scientific reputation. And even though political institutions or funding agencies, for example, are making efforts towards increasing scientists' habit of or scientists' willingness of sharing data, they are still hesitant. And as is known, one of scientists' main concerns is that sharing data might diminish possibilities or opportunities to accumulate scientific reputation. Furthermore, the definition of the term data and its components is still a very complex one. And even though current research shows that standardization seems to be a key factor in sharing, storing, and saving research data, the development of standards is still lacking. My theoretical approach is based on the Pierre Bourdieu's field theory, and he states that each field, in this case, I will talk about science as a field, has its own set of rules, which he calls nomos, and they are quite unique to each field and represent the logic of the field's practice. And as political scientists who are members of the field are recognizing and understanding the rules and agreeing to them, this is called illusio by Bourdieu. Order within the field is created and future actions by other field members are structured. And thus a structure of legitimate patterns of actions within the field is created. Furthermore, field members incorporate experiences they gather in interactions with other field members into their habitus. And the habitus is, according to Bourdieu, a collection of dispositions that generates behavioral and practical forms. It is important to keep in mind that both the habitus and the nomos are dynamic and can be changed or negotiated over the course of time. And as regarding to this approach, as political institutions or funding agencies are trying to increase scientists' willingness to share data, they are also trying to influence scientists' habitus and therefore the field's nomos. So the study's aim is to take a closer look at 2 points by taking also a disciplinary perspective into account. First, the term research data, the definition based on scientist descriptions and standardization in its context. And second, whether or not special funding opportunities or forms of project organization, those kind of incentives Hanna has been talking about right before my presentation, their impact on scientists' willingness to share data. To undertake this study, I decided to use a qualitative approach, and in 2018, I conducted a total of 21 expert interviews by using a structured guideline. The interviewees were of 3 disciplines: biology, neuroscience, and computer science, and except one project, all were organized in so-called collaborative research centers, or CRCs, which are many small research projects with many small research topics, sometimes working in interdisciplinary ways, that are clustered under one main research topic or research goal. Those CRCs are funded by the German Research Foundation, the DFG, and the DFG also offers the opportunity to apply for an infrastructure project for data management. And as we're talking about collaborative research centers, the DFG also expects the projects to work in a collaborative way. The sampling was based on the approach of theoretical sampling by Glaser and Strauss and was guided by 5 criteria. First, whether or not the projects applied for an infrastructure project. Second, the competition, kind and amount of research data generated during the research process, and legal issues regarding the protection of data. Third, the starting year, as some research data should have already been generated. Fourth, the status of the interviewee within the project. And last, that there should have already been some publications. The analysis is based on the approach of theoretical coding by Corbin and Strauss and the qualitative content analysis. And the interviews were read line by line, statements and phenomena were highlighted, codes evolved out of the material that were then transferred into the program MaxQDA, and in the end, all interviews were coded and analyzed in regard to the theoretical approach I've chosen. The material shows, in general, that data exists in 3 states of preparation that is generated during 3 steps in the research process. First, the raw data during the process of data collection. Second, the prepared or partially analyzed data during the step of data preparation, and last, the results data during the step of data processing. Scientists describe raw data as fundamental for their research projects, and one of its main characteristics is that it hasn't been processed thoroughly yet, but checked and stored by scientists. Relevant databases have been put together, further data has been added, or redundant data removed. And raw data can be newly created or obtained by analyzing pre-existing research data. And scientists describe various methods they're using with differing degrees of standardization. So there seems to be no standard in this part of the process. The second state of preparation is the prepared or partially analyzed data that is described by scientists as raw data that has been analyzed in so far as to decide whether or not further information or data should be added or removed. For example, alignments in biology or metadata in general. And they are also describing that they are using different data formats and saving formats during this step of the process. And they are highlighting that a specific expertise and logic is necessary in this part of the process. Furthermore, methods are also considered as research data by scientists, and methods should be shared with others. And expertise and knowledge are also highly valued goods that are or that should be shared with others. The last one, the results data, is usually a quantification in statistical form, and this step of the process is highly standardized. The statistical results are transferred into diagrams, figures, illustrations, or other forms of presentation that are then used in publications, for example. And also, scientists highlight the high amount of effort, expertise, and knowledge that is required in this step of the process. The published results data is then, or it is then possible to interpret the published results data without any specific expertise necessary. On the project organization, scientists describe a greater willingness to operate more openly within the CRCs, but, and this is important, the openness seems to be restricted only to specific states of preparation, like results data or conclusions and expertise, for example. Scientists still prefer to share data in cooperations or in closely bonded relationships. And they justify this by the lack of interest in or no need of data gathered by other projects within the CRC. And the process of sharing itself is mostly organized by scientists themselves without using the project they've applied for. In conclusion, it seems that researchers or scientists do not refer to data only if they are talking about research data, but also to methods, expertise, or knowledge that can be shared or should be shared with other scientists. Furthermore, differences in assessing methods as research data seems to depend on the project organization itself, as sometimes methods had to be developed by scientists and therefore they had a higher value for them. The standardization of methods used in the research process, or the amount of standardization, can be interpreted as an indicator of the research, of the intensity of a research on a topic. And the process of sharing itself is, as already mentioned, not carried out by using the project, but rather by using external hard drives or USB drives. And sharing, even though it seems to be part of scientists' habitus and part of the field's nomos, seems to be highly restricted to selected groups like working groups, laboratories, or collaborations, and states of preparation. Questions that aren't answered in this study, but that are still important, is first, as the transfer of research data in or between interdisciplinary projects seems to be possible. This suggests that research data could be used as a form of capital within the field that scientists can use to accumulate or generate more scientific reputation. The significance of the states of preparation and the steps in the process of preparation are still unclear insofar as there are open questions about the value and use of the different states of preparation by the scientists. Furthermore, the impact of the interviewee's status within the project on decisions made regarding whether data should be shared or not, and the impact of other external factors like legal regulations haven't been answered. So far, thank you very much for your attention, and I'm looking forward to your questions and comments.
Okay, questions, please put your questions in Q&A or raise your hand. I would like to encourage once again attendees to raise their hand and to take part in the discussion. So far, I think we have 1 or 2 questions for you in the list.
Yeah, here 4.
Just one question. What is your study limitation? And we have 1 raised hand. I will allow to talk to Jonathan. Jonathan?
Shall I answer the first question by Liz?
Yes, you can.
Ah, okay. I wasn't sure if you wanted to give the audio to somebody else. The source of, I didn't use data sets themselves. I interviewed scientists on how they are using data sets, how they are sharing data. I hope this answers your question. And I think one of my study's limitations is definitely this results cannot be used to speak in general or to generalize about how scientists share data. I think this is one of the main limitations of this study. So I can just say, okay, it looks like they are sharing data this way, but this must be investigated further.
Okay, thank you very much. If you have time, you can look at the list of the questions in Q&A and answer in using a textual mode, let's say. So you can just press type answer and write your answer on question if you want. Mm-hmm. And I'm going now to introduce the next speaker. Thank you very much, Saskia, for being with us this year, and hopefully you will be again with us next year with some new nice results.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Okay, Wouter is already with us. Just to briefly announce your presentation. So the next presentation is why is getting credit for your research data so hard? It will be presented by Wouter Haak. And Wouter is, just to brief a few words, he's responsible for research data management at Elsevier, actually to be more precise at Mendeley data platform. He will say a few more words about that. And besides that, he's also part of several open data community initiatives. Mostly of them are related to the R letter in the FAIR data, meaning he's focused on data use. So Wouter, please present your paper in 50 minutes.
Will do. Thank you, Dragan. Can I share my screen?
Yes.
Yep. So let's see. You should be seeing my screen right now.
Yes, we can.
Okay, excellent. So thank you again, and with two very interesting talks that preceded me from Saskia and Sarah. Thanks. Particularly the talk we just listened to from Saskia on data sharing is very related to this work. So we did some research at several universities where that data and that research data actually ends up, because not all data actually ends up within the university. So why is this important? Well, data sharing is important always, particularly now, because right now we are in a corona crisis. And I just wanted to give you an example that I thought, even though this is social sciences and humanities, which by the way, can also touch upon COVID, I still want to give this example because I think it's super relevant. I was talking to a group of researchers that were working on corona research, and they actually had a problem. They were analyzing all kinds of solutions to solving the virus, but then the crisis actually in their country had stopped, which is great news. But they could only continue their research after they started collaborating with the next country, which were still in crisis and where there were still patients. So this is a typical example in science. Problems move on, data moves on, and you need to share it and keep track of it to actually be able to solve it. So data sharing is of all times, but it's particularly important now. So what is my definition of data? Well, I actually take a very, very broad definition of data. It can have all forms and shapes. It can be social science surveys. It can be interviews. It can be recordings. It can be process data, but also software. Anything that together form fair data, which hopefully is then interoperable and reusable. But I'm not going to talk about fair data today. I'm going to talk about the researchers that actually already share data today. So as you can see here, data sharing is actually growing faster than the overall output of research. This is because of many reasons. We see the blue line is the overall growth in research output as measured by articles, journal articles. The red line is the growth in research data, the research data associated with articles. You can see it even more starkly if you take, for example, the growth in DataCite, which is one of the ways to register data sets that are being shared. You see very strong growth, particularly since 2014. And this is good news. But is it really good news for those researchers and universities that have been so kind to share their data with us? Do they get credit? Do they get rewarded? At the moment, there's a lot of debate that funding bodies are mandating data sharing and mandating data reuse, but are they actually also rewarding researchers for having shared their data? Because it's a lot of work to prepare that data to be shared, to clean it up, to curate it, and to make sure that it's shareable and no mistakes are left. The interesting bit is that most research data actually ends up outside on external generalist and domain specific repositories. And less than 10% of research data will be hosted on the institution. So for institutions, how do you deal with it? You probably don't even know where your data ends up. And actually, I want to quantify this because actually we looked a little bit deeper at 11 institutions. So we picked a random sample of institutions from all over the world, and we looked, where do these institutions, or basically actually the researchers from these institutions, share their data? How much is shared on the institutional data repositories, if they have them, and how much is hosted on external data repositories or domain-specific repositories? The outcomes are probably not surprising to you, but first, before I go to the outcomes, let me explain how we actually were able to analyze this. We took 14.6 million data sets that we were able to index in Mendeley data search from over 2,000 data repositories worldwide. We then actually also took the data site corpus. We cross-analyzed this against the scholix.org database and the Scopus database to see which data set belonged to which author to which university. Of course, we had to deduplicate, we had to remove non-data entries, and with this, we could actually truly analyze how these 11 universities and the researchers on these universities share their data. The outcome is here. On average, so the total corpus of these universities is roughly 35,000 data sets. 95% of this is shared externally on public or domain repositories outside the university, and only 5% was internal. These universities could not track the external data. They could only track the internal data. I'm giving you the average and median as well, because of the different institutional sizes, the average is sometimes skewed a little bit, and therefore the median is a better measure. So if you take the median or the total, it's really 95% of the data is out there and is usually invisible for the universities themselves, even though it's very good practice to share on domain or subject repositories in any domain. So the conclusion is it's difficult for institutions to have full visibility of this data. So what? Well, if you're an institution, you would like to actually know what data is actually being shared outside, because this way you can actually start rewarding the researchers. You can also report to the funding bodies how well that institution has complied. Because this was so hard to do for 11 universities, we've actually productized it. So now we're able to track for any university in the world where their data ends up. So we've called this Mendeley Data Monitor. It's a tool to track data sets published by researchers, to track the data that ends up anywhere. And basically we're indexing the 14.6 million data sets from those 2,000 data repositories, as well as another 6 million data sets that we've extracted from articles. So this way, we're starting to help universities to see, okay, where do your researchers share your data? Where do other universities share their data, and where do other researchers end up sharing? This may be very trivial and very obvious for researchers, but as a university, if you want to start awarding and rewarding your researchers, and if you want to communicate this back to the funding body, it's hard. And we've tried to make it as simple as possible. All this information is now available through API to any institution or any researcher that's interested. You can basically query the API, or you can do searches on the search interface that we've built. So it's actually fairly trivial now for any institution to start tracking where the data ends up. Of course, this does not replace, for example, data management plans and all the other paperwork that is probably necessary to follow the data policies, but it does make it a lot easier. Because who's going to look at all those data management plans? Who's going to exactly track where everything ends up? Isn't this a lot easier? So this way, even for an institution that does not have their own data repository, you can already start showcasing the data that you have published and that the researchers have created. This is a lot easier than having to go through a difficult process of implementing a research data repository. I'm not saying that's the wrong thing to do. It's great, right? A research data repository is a good thing to have. But why not already reward those researchers that are already sharing data? That's it. Thank you very much. And I'm very much open for questions. My statement is basically, why is getting credit for your data so hard? Well, actually, if you start with tracking the data, it's not hard at all.
Okay, thank you very much, Wouter, for a nice presentation. I noticed there are already some questions in Q&A box. Can you find that?
Yes, I can. Okay. I'll just go very quickly. Joshi is asking, can you explain what I mean by an external data repository? Yes, thank you. Sorry, I should have clarified that. Institutions usually have internal data repositories. That's their own institutional repository. But basically, the majority of data ends up on subject or domain repositories. So, I mean, for example, in the social sciences, there is the DARIA and CLARIA and ICTeSSH repositories. These repositories are generally not tied to an institution, but they are for a community. And basically, each community usually puts their data in what is good for them. So, although that's great for the community, it's very hard for the funding bodies and the institutions then to start rewarding and tracking these researchers that have shared the data. So that is what I mean with external data repositories. Then there's a question about Mendeley data service cost to access. So basically, actually, a lot of what you've seen here is free. So you can search through the repository. You can also use the API. So the 20 million data sets that are out there, you can already search through. The enrichment we have done to tie these data sets to an institution, that is a paid for service. So the free service is already useful for researchers wanting to search through 20 million data sets. Having actually the counts per institution and being able to incentivize researchers is something that we deliver to institutions as a paid for service. I see a question about incentives for researchers.
My apologies. Can you continue answering all the questions in text?
I can. Will do. Thank you for your time.
Because we are time limited, and thank you, of course, for joining us this year. And my apologies that we are time limited.
No problem. I'm glad there were so many questions.
Yeah, it's nice that there are a lot of questions, of course. So now I'm going to introduce the next speech. Which is the next presentation is entitled "What Flowers Can Bloom in a Green Open Access Landscape, Imagining a Future with BitViews." The only author is Manfredi La Manna. He's also a co-founder of, I think, of this initiative. And it's somehow related to this quiz we listened this morning training. So Manfredi is a reader in economics at the University of St. Andrews with a long-standing interest in open access. And he was one of the 16 signatories of the Budapest Open Access Initiative. Currently, he is the director of the BitViews project. Okay. That is great. We can hear you. That's good. So please start your presentation. You have 15 minutes for presentations and leave a few of minutes for questions, please. Now I'm going to stop sharing the screen.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, but there is some background noise. I will try to mute myself and to stop video.
Okay. Is this better? Sorry,
Manfredi,
is.
can you try
Yep.
to turn off your another one device?
Okay, let me move to a different location altogether. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you very well now.
Okay, excellent. Apologies to everybody. This is on a tablet because I had problems with my main laptop. So let me try to open the. Forgive me for a second. Okay, I am having serious problems here. I need 1 more minute, please. Just a second.
Okay, my apologies for this inconvenience on behalf of Manfredi, but I understand that there is some technical issue. Hopefully it will be resolved soon because we already made.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
You can hear me. That's fantastic. And
you can only have one device on at a time. You should close the other ones down.
Yes, Luti is right. Actually, the problem is there are 2 devices. Now I turned off one Manfredi device.
okay, I'm back, but I cannot. Right, just give me 1 second. Right, I'm afraid you will have to bear with my just video presentation because I can't share my slides, but that is not important. I will post them at a later stage. Right, essentially the open access project objective of making the content of peer review research available to anyone, everywhere, anytime, for free, has failed. Let's start with that recognition. And the economic and financial crisis triggered by COVID-19 will make this failure even worse. There will be some so-called transformative agreements, but they will not conceal the fact that most libraries will renew their contracts with oligopolistic journal publishers on terms largely dictated by them. Before COVID, the chances of success of projects such as BitViews, which were quite good, are now very low. So what follows is just an exercise in unwarranted optimism, a brief description of a fairer, more efficient, and technically possible ecosystem where knowledge flows unimpeded for the benefit of everybody. So what is BitViews? For those who don't know about it, BitViews is a blockchain application that collects, validates, and aggregates worldwide online usage data of authors' approved manuscripts. This is a very important concept. which are deposited on open access repositories. It creates a free public ledger of usage events that allows anyone to see which research outputs have been accessed, where, and when, and thus provides the raw material to construct discipline and region-specific, non-citation-based measures of research impact. So assuming that BitViews is successful, which is a big if, what would be the short-term effects? Well, the main thing is that BitViews provides individual authors with the so far missing incentive to incur the small costs of depositing their peer review AAMs on an open access repository. For those who are not familiar with the terminology, the AAM is the last but one stage of the production process of a paper. It has 100% content of the published article, but without the pagination, etc. But contains 100% of the published article. And that can be put on an open access basis. Now, by providing this facility to authors of seeing where, when, and how their papers are being read and downloaded, AAMs would have acquired independent value from the published and often paywalled article. Now, this is not hypothetical. Let us assume that every single AAM authored by a US federally funded researcher were to be mandated to be available on open access with zero embargo. Everybody should be happy. A major step towards universal open access would have been taken, a major step. Well, not so. All you've got to do is to check the letter that was sent to the US Office of Science and Technology that proposed this precise change. And there you will find the unholy alliance of the usual suspects, our oligopolistic academic publishers and sponsors, and virtually every single US learned and scientific society. So just to remind ourselves that open access has incredibly powerful enemies. On the other side, there are open access fundamentalists who have criticized projects such as BitViews for its lack of ambition, vision, doesn't disrupt things. It works within the current system. Essentially, there is no storming of the Elsevier, Wiley, Springer citadel. Okay, that is not the case, because if we look at the long-term effects of BitViews, we would see that as soon as academics realize the difference between AAMs and published articles, and at the moment, most of them don't know what an AAM is, the whole foundation of the current publishing model can be put into question. Who produces AAMs? Answer: academics, as authors, referees, and editors. And what is the effective cost of producing AAMs? Contrary to the claims of both open access and commercial publishers, the costs of peer review are comparatively small and mainly fixed in nature. What does that mean? That the academy should reclaim both ownership and control of the whole peer review process, from submission to the production of AAMs, not articles. and in the process save literally billions of dollars, pounds, and euros. There would still be a role for publishers, but completely different. The value of academy-owned AIMs can be increased by the provision of additional services in which commercial publishers have a comparative advantage: printing, distributing hard copy, referencing, etc. But notice the inversion of roles. The academy will switch from being a passive and largely exploited consumer of published articles to suppliers of AIMs. And correspondingly, publishers would have to compete with each other for the right to provide additional services that augment the value of AIMs. This more rational, fairer, and more efficient mechanism can be implemented only if crucial stakeholders, Freudian slip there, are provided with the correct incentives. In the post-COVID-19 world, a key role is going to be played by university administrators, whose finances will deteriorate substantially. They will have a stark choice: either business as usual.
Manfredi, my apologies for interrupting you. I'm really enjoying in your talk, and it's interesting and inspirative for thinking and so on. But can you please somehow complete your talk in the next couple of minutes?
I've literally got 30 seconds to go.
Okay, thank you. Perfect. Thank you very much.
Right. So the choice would be between business as usual or reclaiming ownership of peer review. Now, this applies also to disciplines that are not journal-centric, like economics, but other disciplines, because the benefits are exactly the same. So what I'm saying in conclusion is that there is a simple, cheap, effective nudge that can achieve open access now and later reform radically the relationship between the academy and publishers. But will cautious and fund-strapped librarians and university managers try it? I don't think so. Thank you.
Manfredi, thank you very much, and my apologies again for interrupting you during
I'm sorry for all the technical problems, but any questions, I'm here, and if there are questions in the chat box, I'll be more than happy, and I will provide the slides.
Okay, thank you very much. I will share it after the conference when you send me to my email. Okay, no problem. Just briefly to answer maybe one question alive before we give a short break to the attendees. Could you explain what is the benefit the blockchain brings to the BitViews application? Why the database containing all the statistics was not enough?
Right. Okay. There are. This is not a new problem. So there have been various attempts to try and collect data from stuff that is on open access repositories. And the UK is in a sense a leader in that with an initiative called IRIS. The problem there is that it is kind of localized. So all the AIMs in the UK are in fact collectible and searchable. But in the US, there's virtually nothing. And without a worldwide reach, the incentive for authors to take the step of depositing their AIMs is virtually zero. A blockchain makes the process incredibly cheap and scalable to a worldwide context very easily. That's the advantage of a blockchain. And essentially what a blockchain does in this particular case is to treat the DOI of AIMs the way in which Bitcoin treats accounts. If you think about it, is the same concept. So every time anyone looks at my paper, my account goes up by 1 BitView.
Okay, Manfredi, thank you very much.
It's the very same concept.
Thank you very much for your response and for your contribution to the program of the conference. I think it was really interesting, actually, and it's
thank you for inviting me in the first place
to the science. And I would like to give just a couple of minutes break to the audience, just you have enough time just to pick up a coffee to your desk, because we are all eagerly waiting our next session, which includes our first keynote speaker. It's Brian Osek. He will talk about crowdsourcing science, which is also an interesting topic, I think, in this moment of Web 2.0 technologies and everything other